He walked into his own bank branch to sign routine paperwork, dressed down in a simple gray hoodie and jeans on his rare day off. In a shocking turn, he soon found himself pinned against the cold marble floor by a rogue police officer whose prejudice had completely blinded him to reality. What Officer Harlan Crow didn't know was that the man he was illegally detaining wasn't just a customer. He owned the building. He owned the vault. He owned the payroll. One phone call was about to end Crow's long career. The wind whipped through the affluent streets of Westfield, New Jersey, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and expensive dark roast coffee. It was a quiet morning, the kind of slow-paced weekend day when the town's elite traded their tailored Italian suits for high-end athleisure wear, strolling past boutique shops and manicured parks. Marcus Holloway fit right in, yet paradoxically stood entirely apart. At 42, he was a man who had built an empire from the ground up. Raised in a working-class neighborhood just 2 towns over, he had spent the last 2 decades ruthlessly and brilliantly climbing the financial sector's ladder. Years earlier, he had orchestrated the massive buyout of Harbor Trust and Company, a regional bank that had been struggling. Under his leadership as CEO and majority shareholder, Harbor Trust had become a financial juggernaut, boasting over 50 branches across the tri-state area. But Marcus didn't look like a CEO this morning. He was a man who valued his weekends. Having just finished a grueling 6-mile run, he was dressed in a faded, comfortably worn gray athletic hoodie, dark denim jeans, and a pair of scuffed running shoes. He had left his wallet in his SUV, carrying only his car keys and his smartphone. He just needed to pop into the flagship Westfield branch to sign off on a stack of urgent compliance documents that the branch manager, Lena Prescott, had prepared for an upcoming federal audit. The Westfield branch of Harbor Trust and Company was an architectural marvel. A blend of classic 1920s banking grandeur and modern minimalist design. High vaulted ceilings, polished imported Italian marble floors, and teller stations encased in bullet-resistant glass that looked perfectly clear. As Marcus pulled open the heavy brass doors, the warm air of the lobby hit him. It was relatively quiet. Only 3 customers stood in the teller line, older locals depositing checks or asking about CD rates. Standing near the front entrance, leaning against a high-top mahogany writing desk, was Officer Harlan Crow. Crow was a veteran of the local police department with decades of service. He was a large, imposing man with a thick neck, graying hair cropped in a strict military fade, and a demeanor that suggested the world owed him a debt it was severely late on paying. He was working an off-duty security detail for the bank, a cushy gig that paid time and a half, allowing him to stand in the air conditioning, drink free premium coffee, and assert his authority over anyone who looked at him sideways. Crow had a reputation in the department. He was a relic of an older, much uglier era of policing. He had a file of civilian complaints thicker than a phone book, mostly for harassment, excessive force, and racial profiling. A strong police union and a series of sympathetic old-school supervisors had always managed to sweep his indiscretions under the rug. Crow saw the world in rigid categories, and he had already decided who belonged in Westfield and who didn't. Marcus walked past Crow without a second glance, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming audit. He bypassed the velvet ropes of the main teller line entirely. As the CEO, he knew the layout intimately. To the right of the teller stations was a frosted glass door that read Private Banking and Management. It led directly to Lena Prescott's office and the secure back rooms. Crow's eyes locked onto Marcus immediately. The officer's posture stiffened, his hand instinctively resting on his duty belt. In Crow's mind, the narrative wrote itself instantly. A tall, athletic black man in a hooded sweatshirt and worn sneakers had just walked into one of the wealthiest banks in the county, ignored the line, and was heading straight for the restricted employee area. Crow didn't see a local resident. He certainly didn't see a CEO. He saw a threat. He saw a stereotype. And most importantly, he saw an opportunity to exercise the absolute power he felt he was entitled to. "Hey!" Crow's voice barked out across the quiet lobby, echoing off the marble walls. "Hey, you hold it right there." Marcus paused, his hand resting on the brushed steel handle of the frosted glass door. He turned around slowly, his expression neutral, accustomed to the weight of command, but not immediately recognizing the hostility directed at him. He looked at the officer, waiting for him to speak. "Step away from the door," Crow commanded, closing the distance between them with heavy, deliberate footsteps. The leather of his gun belt creaked in the sudden silence of the lobby. The few customers in the teller line turned their heads, conversations dying instantly. "Can I help you, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice calm, pitched in the even, resonant tone he used during high-stakes board meetings. "I'm the one helping you," Crow sneered, stopping just 2 feet from Marcus, invading his personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm going into the back office," Marcus replied simply. "I have a meeting with Lena Prescott." Crow's eyes narrowed, scanning Marcus from the hood of his sweatshirt down to his scuffed sneakers. A smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "Lena Prescott, the branch manager. You have a meeting with the branch manager on a quiet morning, dressed like you just rolled out of an alley." Marcus felt the familiar, ugly sting of prejudice A ghost he had fought his entire life, one that wealth and status were supposed to shield him from, but never truly could. He took a slow breath, deciding to handle this with the quiet dignity he was known for. "Yes," Marcus said. "She's expecting me, if you'll excuse me." He turned back toward the door, pulling the handle. That was Crow's breaking point. Nobody turned their back on him. Nobody dismissed him. "I said, hold it!" Crow snapped, his voice rising to a shout. He lunged forward, his heavy hand clamping down hard on Marcus's left shoulder, yanking him backward away from the glass door. Marcus stumbled half a step, but instantly righted himself, his core tightening. His eyes, previously calm, now flashed with a cold, hardened warning. "Remove your hand from me, officer, right now." The sheer authority in Marcus's voice momentarily startled Crow. It wasn't the panicked defense of a criminal, nor the nervous compliance of a civilian. It was an order delivered by a man completely unaccustomed to being touched or questioned. But Crow's ego violently rejected the tone. "You don't give the orders here, pal," Crow hissed, stepping closer, his face turning a mottled red. "You are attempting to bypass security into a restricted area of a financial institution. I want to see your ID now." Behind the teller stations, a newly hired teller named Sophia Lang watched with wide, terrified eyes. She had only recently started working at Harbor Trust. She had never met the CEO. She only knew his name from the glossy welcome packets she'd been given on her first day. Seeing a police officer physically grab a man in the lobby sent her into a panic. She instinctively hovered her hand over the silent alarm button beneath her desk, but hesitated, unsure of what protocol dictated. "I don't have my wallet on me," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, perfectly controlled, but carrying a dangerous edge. "I left it in my car, but as I just told you, Lena Prescott is expecting me. If you simply let me knock on her door, or if you call her out here, this will be cleared up in seconds." "Oh, you left it in your car," Crow mocked, his voice loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. He wanted an audience. He wanted to humiliate this man. How convenient. A guy walks into a bank, no ID, wearing a hoodie, and tries to force his way into the vault area. "You think I'm stupid?" "I think," Marcus said, holding Crow's gaze without blinking, "that you are making an incredibly severe mistake, and you are currently acting on biases that are going to cost you your badge." Crow's jaw clenched. The threat to his badge hit the exact nerve Marcus intended to strike. The officer's hand dropped to his utility belt, unclipping his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back," Crow barked. Marcus didn't move. "I have committed no crime. You have no reasonable, articulable suspicion to detain me, let alone arrest me. I am telling you for the final time to call Lena Prescott." Marcus reached into his front hoodie pocket, intending to pull out his smartphone to dial Lena himself. "He's reaching!" Crow yelled, though he was the only one escalating. In a flash of unwarranted violence, Crow shoved Marcus violently against the polished mahogany writing desk. The heavy wood dug into Marcus's ribs. Before Marcus could react, Crow grabbed his right arm, twisted it painfully behind his back, and slammed his weight into Marcus, pinning him against the desk. Gasps erupted from the customers in the lobby. An elderly woman clutched her purse to her chest, stepping backward toward the exit. "Do not resist. Stop resisting," Crow shouted, reciting the practiced mantra of a corrupt cop creating an alibi for his own brutality. Marcus wasn't resisting. He was an incredibly fit man, entirely capable of throwing the overweight officer off him. But he was also a black man in America. He knew the lethal consequences of fighting back, even when entirely in the right. He went completely limp, allowing his body to be manhandled to prevent giving Crow any excuse to draw his weapon. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated loudly, ensuring the tellers and the security cameras capturing the lobby picked up his clear, unpanicked voice. "I am fully compliant. You are assaulting me." Click, click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into Marcus's wrists. Crow wrenched the cuffs up, pulling a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain from Marcus's lips. "You're under arrest," Crow spat, yanking Marcus away from the desk and shoving him toward the center of the lobby. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." Crow forced Marcus to his knees on the hard marble floor. The sheer indignity of it, being forced to kneel in the center of the institution he had built, treated like a common criminal by a man drunk on a tiny sliver of power, burned like acid in Marcus's chest. But beneath the humiliation, a cold, calculating fury was solidifying. Marcus Holloway did not get angry. He got even, and he was about to completely dismantle Officer Harlan Crow's life. Crow reached up to the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have one male suspect in custody at the Harbor Trust branch on Broad Street. Suspect was attempting unauthorized entry into the secure bank area and actively resisted. Send a transport unit." "Unit 4, copy. Transport is en route." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Crow looked down at Marcus, a victorious, ugly smirk on his face. "You picked the wrong town, buddy. We don't tolerate your kind of nonsense in Westfield." Marcus looked up at him, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." The heavy, frosted glass door labeled Private Banking and Management finally swung open. Lena Prescott, A sharp, impeccably dressed woman walked out holding a thick manila folder of compliance documents. She had been on a conference call in the vault room and hadn't heard the initial shouting. "Sophia, did Mr. Holloway?" Lena started to ask the new teller, her eyes scanning the room. She stopped dead in her tracks. The manila folder slipped from her fingers, the heavy pages scattering across the marble floor with a loud slap. Her eyes darted from the terrified customers to the aggressive posture of Officer Crow, and finally down to the man kneeling on the floor in handcuffs. "Marcus!" Lena gasped, the blood draining from her face so fast she felt dizzy. "Morning, Lena," Marcus said from his knees, his voice remarkably steady, despite his arms being pulled painfully tight behind him. "Apologies for the scene." Crow looked over at the branch manager, puffing out his chest, completely misinterpreting her horror. "It's all right, Ms. Prescott. I've got the situation under control. This individual was attempting to breach your office area. He refused to show ID and became combative." Lena stared at Crow as if he had just sprouted a second head. For a moment, she was completely paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of what she was witnessing. Then, the paralysis gave way to a volcanic protective rage. "Are you out of your mind?" Lena screamed, her voice cracking like a whip across the silent lobby. She marched forward, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble. "Take those handcuffs off him right now." Crow blinked, momentarily thrown. "Ma'am, step back. This is an active crime scene. This man is a suspect." "This man is Marcus Holloway," Lena yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus, then shoving it directly into Crow's face. "He is the chief executive officer of Harbor Trust. He owns this bank. He owns this building. And he pays your damn salary for this security detail. Take the cuffs off." The words hit the lobby like a physical shockwave. The elderly woman near the door gasped. Sophia the teller covered her mouth with both hands. Officer Crow froze. The smug, authoritative mask on his face shattered, replaced instantly by the pale, sickening realization of catastrophic error. His eyes darted down to Marcus, who was staring back at him with an expression of absolute, terrifying calm. He didn't have ID. Crow stammered, his booming voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic croak. He instinctively took a half-step backward. He was wearing a hoodie. He didn't look like a CEO. He didn't look like a CEO to you. Lena stepped into Crow's space, her fury radiant. "What exactly does a CEO look like to you, Officer Crow? Because right now, you look like a man who is going to be facing a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit before lunchtime." Crow's hands trembled as he reached for his handcuff keys. His mind was racing, desperately trying to find a way to justify this, to spin it, to save his pension. I was just following protocol. He resisted. He refused to comply with a lawful order. Leave them on. Marcus's voice cut through the panic. Crow stopped, the key hovering an inch from the steel cuffs. He looked down at Marcus, confused. "Sir, I'm going to take these off." I said. "Leave them on," Marcus repeated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He shifted his weight, sitting back on his heels, turning his bound wrists slightly to ensure the cuffs remained locked. "You made an arrest, Officer Crow. You radioed dispatch. You told them I was actively resisting. You created a permanent record of this interaction. If you take these cuffs off now, you'll just lie on your report and say it was a misunderstanding. I am not a misunderstanding." Marcus looked at his branch manager. "Lena, my phone is in my front pocket. Take it out." Lena immediately knelt beside Marcus, her hands shaking slightly as she reached into his hoodie pocket and retrieved his sleek black smartphone. "Unlock it," Marcus instructed, providing his passcode. "Go to my contacts. Look up Victor Langford." At the sound of the name, Officer Crow felt his stomach drop completely out of his body. Chief Victor Langford, the head of the Westfield Police Department, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on corruption, had been trying to find a legitimate, airtight reason to fire Crow for years without triggering a union war. "Call him," Marcus said quietly. "Sir, please," Crow begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. The towering bully from moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified man staring down the barrel of his own ruin. "Please, let's just talk about this. I made a mistake. I didn't know who you were." "That is exactly the point, officer," Marcus said, his eyes drilling into Crow's soul. "You didn't know who I was, and if I had been anyone else, if I had just been a normal citizen coming in to cash a check, you would have ruined my life today. You would have thrown me in a cell, charged me with resisting arrest, and let the system crush me just to protect your ego." Marcus's voice grew colder, sharper. "You didn't assault a CEO today, Crow. You assaulted a citizen. The fact that I'm the CEO is just the reason you're not going to get away with it." Lena put the phone on speaker and held it up. The dial tone rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered. "Marcus, it's a quiet morning. You better not be calling to cancel our golf time tomorrow." "Good morning, Victor," Marcus said smoothly, ignoring the pain in his shoulders. "I'm not canceling, but I am currently handcuffed on my knees on the floor of my own bank branch. One of your officers, a Mr. Harlan Crow, has just assaulted me and placed me under arrest for walking into my own building." silence hung on the line. Heavy, oppressive silence. When Chief Langford finally spoke, the jovial tone was completely gone. His voice was a quiet, lethal rumble. "Marcus, are you injured?" "Bruised," Marcus replied. "But fine. Officer Crow has requested a transport unit. I'd appreciate it if you could be the one driving it." "I am leaving my driveway right now," Chief Langford said, the sound of a car engine roaring to life in the background. "Put Crow on the phone." Lena held the phone out toward the officer. Crow stared at the glowing device as if it were a live grenade. He slowly reached out and took it, his hand visibly shaking. "Chief," Crow whispered. "Harlan," Chief Langford said. The disgust in the chief's voice was palpable, even through the small speaker. "You have exactly a few minutes to pray to whatever god you believe in before I get there. Do not speak to Mr. Holloway. Do not touch Mr. Holloway. You stand against the wall, you keep your mouth shut, and you prepare to hand over your badge." The line went dead. Crow stood there in the center of the lavish lobby, the phone slipping from his sweaty grip to land softly on the marble. He looked at the tellers, who were staring at him with a mix of shock and vindication. He looked at Lena, whose eyes promised total destruction. And finally, he looked down at the man he had judged, assaulted, and underestimated. Marcus Holloway remained on his knees, his hands still cuffed behind his back, waiting patiently for the storm he had just summoned to arrive. The silence inside the Westfield branch of Harbor Trust and Company was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, shallow breathing of Officer Harlan Crow. He stood exactly where Chief Victor Langford had ordered him to stand, flat against the cool Italian marble wall near the entrance, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He looked like a deflated balloon, the toxic air of his unchecked ego violently punctured by a single phone call. Marcus Holloway remained on his knees in the center of the lobby. The steel handcuffs pinched brutally at his ulnar nerves, sending sharp spikes of numbness down to his fingertips. Lena Prescott hovered inches away from him, her posture a rigid shield, her eyes locked onto Crow with a glaring, unblinking intensity that promised absolute ruin. Behind the bullet-resistant glass, Sophia Lang and the other tellers stood frozen, witnesses to a colossal shift in power. Moments later, the wail of a siren pierced the air outside. It wasn't the standard rising and falling siren of a patrol car. It was the deep, aggressive blare of an unmarked police SUV. Tires screeched violently against the pavement outside the heavy brass doors. Through the expansive front windows, everyone in the lobby watched as a black Ford Explorer slammed into the curb, its red and blue grille lights flashing with blinding urgency. The driver's side door flew open before the vehicle had even fully settled. Chief Victor Langford stepped out. He was a formidable man in his late 50s, possessing a sharp, hawk-like gaze and an uncompromising posture forged from decades in law enforcement. He was wearing his weekend civilian clothes, khakis, and a navy blue windbreaker. But the gold shield clipped to his belt and the sheer radiant fury in his stride made him look more imposing than a SWAT team in full tactical gear. Langford shoved the heavy brass doors open so hard they slammed against their stoppers, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted lobby. He didn't look at the tellers. He didn't look at Lena. He completely ignored Crow against the wall, his eyes locked immediately onto the CEO of the bank, kneeling on the floor in handcuffs. A dark, dangerous shade of crimson crept up Chief Langford's neck. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the room. He marched directly toward the center of the lobby, stopping right in front of Marcos. "Victor," Marcus replied evenly, looking up. "I appreciate the prompt response." Langford finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over to the wall. "Crow, keys, now." Crow scrambled, his thick, clumsy fingers fumbling desperately at his utility belt. He yanked the small silver handcuff key free and practically sprinted the short distance to the chief, holding the key out as if it were a white flag of surrender. "Chief, listen to me. I was just... If you speak another word before I explicitly order you to, I will have you arrested for insubordination and obstruction of justice right here on this floor." Langford snarled, snatching the key from Crow's trembling hand. "Step back." Crow recoiled, as if he had been physically struck, retreating to his spot against the wall, the blood draining entirely from his face. Chief Langford knelt behind Marcus, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The mechanical click of the handcuffs releasing sounded deafening in the quiet bank. Langford gently guided the heavy steel bracelets off Marcus's wrists. Marcus slowly brought his arms forward, his face wincing slightly in pain. Deep, angry red indentations circled both of his wrists, already beginning to swell and bruise purple. Lena immediately handed him a tissue from a nearby desk, her eyes welling with sympathetic tears. But Marcus waved it away. He rubbed his wrists, standing up slowly to his full height. He brushed the dust off his faded gray athletic hoodie, instantly transforming back from a detained suspect into the man who owned the room. "Are you injured, Marcus?" Langford asked again, his tone shifting to one of deep professional concern. "Do I need to call paramedics?" "No paramedics," Marcus said, his voice returning to its sharp, commanding boardroom cadence. "But I want those bruises documented thoroughly." "Consider it done," Langford said, standing up. He turned his attention back to Crow. The chief's demeanor shifted from concerned friend to an apex predator, zeroing in on its prey. He walked slowly toward the disgraced officer, stopping uncomfortably close. "Let me ensure I have a complete grasp of this situation," Langford said softly, a tone far more terrifying than a shout. "I received a call that one of my veteran officers assaulted a prominent local business leader inside his own commercial property, without cause. Chief, I didn't know who he was," Crow burst out, the panic overriding the order to stay silent. Desperation leaked from every syllable. "He was wearing a hoodie. He bypassed the line. He tried to force his way into the back offices. He refused to show ID. I thought he was a threat to the bank. I was following standard protocol for an uncooperative, unidentified suspect attempting unauthorized access." Crow was clinging to the only lifeline he knew, the vague, subjective phrasing of police handbooks designed to protect officers making split-second decisions. He was betting on the blue wall of silence, the unspoken rule that cops protect cops no matter what. Marcus let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Standard protocol or standard prejudice? He resisted. Crow pointed a trembling finger at Marcus, emboldened slightly by the instinct of self-preservation. He pulled away from me. He reached into his pocket. I had to use force to secure the scene. Any officer would have done the exact same thing. Langford didn't flinch. He just stared at Crow with a look of profound, unadulterated disgust. "You're telling me," Langford said slowly, "that Mr. Holloway, a man with no criminal record, who runs a multi-billion-dollar financial institution, actively fought you and reached into his pocket in a threatening manner?" "Yes," Crow lied, nodding vigorously, his eyes wide with desperate conviction. "It's my word against his. Chief, I was protecting the bank." "Your word against his," Langford repeated. He looked over his shoulder at Marcus. Marcus wasn't looking at the chief. He was looking up toward the vaulted ceiling. He pointed a long, steady finger at a sleek black dome-shaped camera mounted in the corner. Then he pointed to another above the teller stations, and another directly above the mahogany writing desk, where he had been slammed. "Officer Crow," Marcus said, his voice dripping with icy, absolute certainty. "This is a bank. We hold tens of millions of dollars in liquid assets in the vault behind those frosted glass doors. Did you genuinely believe my security system consists of nothing but your word?" Lena stepped forward, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, a triumphant, razor-sharp smile cutting across her face. "Actually, Chief Langford," Lena intervened, "we upgraded our entire security matrix recently to comply with new federal banking regulations. We don't just have video. We have full high-resolution video covering every square inch of this lobby from multiple angles. and we have directional high-definition audio recording. Every single whisper, every breath, and every lie you just told the chief is sitting on a secure cloud-based server." The remaining color drained from Crow's face. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death certificate. "Let's go to my office," Lena said, gesturing toward the frosted glass door. "I think we should all watch a movie." The back office of Harbor Trust and Company was a stark contrast to the classic grandeur of the lobby. It was a sleek, ultra-modern command center filled with ergonomic chairs, frosted glass partitions, and multiple high-resolution monitors. Marcus Holloway sat at the head of a polished conference table, massaging his bruised wrists. Chief Langford stood right behind him, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Officer Crow stood near the door, flanked by 2 more Westfield police officers who had arrived shortly after the chief. Langford had ordered them to flank Crow, silently treating the veteran cop not as a colleague, but as a suspect in custody. Lena sat at the primary terminal, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced speed. She pulled up the bank's proprietary security software. "Pull up camera 3, the one positioned over the writing desk," Marcus instructed quietly, "and sync the audio from the lobby central mic." "Syncing now," Lena confirmed. A massive, flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. The high-definition footage was terrifyingly clear. It showed the lobby in vibrant, crisp detail. There was Marcus walking through the doors in his gray hoodie. There was Crow leaning against the desk, his body language instantly shifting from relaxed to aggressive the moment Marcus stepped inside. Lena clicked a button, and the audio filled the room, crisp and undeniable. Hey, you hold it right there," Crow's voice boomed from the speakers. The people in the room watched in suffocating silence as the digital encounter played out. They heard Marcus's calm, measured responses. They heard him explicitly state his identity, his purpose, and his impending meeting with Lena Prescott. They heard him offer a simple, rational solution. Call the branch manager. And then they watched Crow snap. The high-resolution footage captured every damning nuance. It captured the exact moment Crow's hand clamped down on Marcus's shoulder. It captured Marcus standing perfectly still, his hands visible, making no aggressive movements whatsoever. "He's reaching," the digital Crow shouted on screen. Simultaneously, the video clearly showed Marcus's hand slowly moving toward his pocket to retrieve his phone. His body relaxed, presenting zero physical threat. Then came the violence. The room watched as Crow forcefully shoved Marcus into the heavy mahogany desk. The microphones picked up the loud, sickening thud of Marcus's ribs hitting the wood. It picked up the sharp hiss of pain from Marcus as his arm was brutally twisted behind his back. It captured Crow forcefully, driving his knee into the back of Marcus's legs to force him to the marble floor. "Do not resist. Stop resisting," the recorded Crow yelled. Yet the video unequivocally showed Marcus completely limp, utterly compliant, offering not a single ounce of physical resistance while being manhandled. The video ended with Crow's smug, terrifyingly racist remark echoing through the speakers. "You picked the wrong town, buddy. We don't tolerate your kind of nonsense in Westfield." Lena paused the video on the frame of Crow, smirking down at the handcuffed CEO. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a career being completely, irrevocably destroyed. Chief Langford closed his eyes for a long, agonizing moment, pinching the bridge of his nose. The vein in his neck was throbbing visibly. When he finally opened his eyes and turned to Crow, the air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You lied," Langford said. The two words were spoken with such quiet, lethal disappointment that they hit harder than a physical blow. "You assaulted a compliant citizen. You escalated a non-violent encounter into a physical altercation. You falsified your reason for detainment on the police radio, and then you stood in my face and lied to your commanding officer to cover up your own gross incompetence and prejudice." Crow was shaking uncontrollably. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Chief, please. Decades I've given to this department. You can't just. It was a lapse in judgment. I want to call my union representative." "You can call whoever you want, Harlan," Langford said, stepping forward until he was inches from Crow's face. "But the union cannot protect you from felony assault charges." Crow gasped, his eyes widening in pure horror. "Felony? You unlawfully detained and assaulted a man, causing bodily injury under color of law." Marcus Holloway spoke up from the table, his voice sharp and unyielding. "My attorneys are already drafting the paperwork. I am not suing the city, Crow. I am not suing the police department. Chief Langford runs a fine department, and I will not let your actions taint the officers who actually do their jobs correctly." Marcus stood up, walking slowly toward the terrified officer. "I am suing you," Marcus stated, pointing a finger directly at Crow's chest. "I am suing you in civil court for intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, and civil rights violations. I am going after your house. I am going after your savings. And when the district attorney sees this high-resolution video, they are going to press criminal charges, which means that precious pension you've been counting on is going to be stripped away. the second you are convicted of a felony. You can't do that, Crow stammered, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over his eyelids. My pension. My wife. You should have thought about your wife before you decided to play judge, jury, and executioner in my lobby, Marcus replied coldly, offering zero empathy. You thought you had absolute power over me because of how I looked. You are about to find out what absolute power actually looks like. Chief Langford held out his hand, palm up. Badge and gun, Crow, right now, Langford ordered. Crow's hands trembled violently as he unclipped his holster, handing over his department-issued firearm to the officer beside him. He then slowly, painfully unpinned the silver star from his chest, the badge he had hidden behind for decades to bully the vulnerable. He placed it in the chief's waiting palm. Officer Davis, Langford said to the cop on Crow's right, escort Mr. Crow to a holding cell at the precinct. He is officially suspended without pay, pending an immediate internal affairs investigation and criminal referral to the district attorney. Chief, please let me just call Leonard Shaw. Let me call the union, Crow begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob as the reality of his destroyed life crashed down upon him. Go ahead, Langford said, gesturing to the phone on the conference table. Call him. Put him on speaker. Let's see how eager the union is to defend this. Crow practically lunged for the phone, dialing the union representative's emergency number with shaking fingers. The phone rang several times before a gruff voice answered. Leonard Shaw. Leonard, it's Harlan Crow. You got to help me. They're taking my badge. They're talking about felonies. You got to get down here to Harbor Trust right now. There was a pause on the line. Then Shaw's voice came back, sounding incredibly weary. Harlan, I just got off the phone with the DA's office. They already received a direct line call from Marcus Holloway's high-powered legal team. They forwarded a clip of the security footage. Leonard, it's out of context. You have to fight this for me. Harlan, Shaw said, his voice dropping all sympathy. I saw the tape. You assaulted the CEO of the bank for wearing a sweatshirt. You lied on the radio. You lied to the chief. The union provides legal defense for officers acting within the scope of their duties. Committing a racially motivated felony assault on camera is not within the scope of your duties. Crow's breath hitched. Leonard, what are you saying? I'm saying you're on your own, Harlan. Do not call this number again. Click. The dial tone echoed loudly in the sleek modern office, sounding like the final flatlining heartbeat of Harlan Crow's long career. The dial tone blared from the conference room speaker, a harsh, monotonous screech that signaled the absolute end of Harlan Crow's reign of intimidation. Lena reached over and calmly pressed the disconnect button. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than before. Crow's knees visibly buckled if Officer Davis hadn't instinctively reached out to grab his bicep. The massive, imposing cop would have collapsed onto the plush carpet. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving behind a sickly, ashen gray. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The invincible shield of the blue wall had evaporated, leaving him entirely exposed to the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the justice system he had so frequently weaponized against others. "Turn around, Harlan," Officer Davis ordered. There was no sympathy in the younger cop's voice. Davis had worked under Crow's toxic shadow, enduring his bigoted remarks and outdated, aggressive tactics. Davis had always kept his head down, fearing retaliation. Now he was the one holding the power. Crow didn't move. He simply stared blankly at the floor, trapped in a state of catatonic shock. "I said, turn around and put your hands behind your back," Davis repeated, his voice hardening into a sharp command. He forcefully spun Crow around, the metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting securely around Crow's wrists echoed off the frosted glass walls. It was a poetic, brutal symmetry. Just a short time earlier, Crow had forcefully applied those exact restraints to an innocent man to feed his own ego. Now they bound his own hands, securing his downfall. Chief Langford stepped back, his posture rigid. "Read him his rights, Davis. Textbook. I don't want a single procedural error on this arrest. If he so much as breathes incorrectly on the way to the cruiser, you document it." "Yes, Chief," Davis replied. He grabbed Crow by the tricep. "Harlan Crow, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda warning filled the room, Marcus Holloway watched with cold, calculating detachment. He rubbed his deeply bruised wrists, feeling the throbbing pain. But his mind was already steps ahead. He wasn't just going to see this man locked up. He was going to use this moment to set an inescapable, highly public precedent. "Take him out through the front," Marcus commanded quietly, his voice cutting through Davis's recitation. Langford looked at Marcus, a silent question in his eyes. Standard protocol for an arrested officer was usually a discreet exit through a back door or loading dock to avoid public spectacle. "He wanted an audience," Marcus said, his gaze locking with Langford's. "He loudly humiliated me in the center of my own lobby, in front of my employees and my customers, to make himself feel powerful. He does not get the privilege of a quiet exit. Take him out the front door." Langford nodded slowly, acknowledging the absolute justice in the request. "You heard the man, Davis. Straight through the main lobby." The frosted glass door swung open. Officer Davis marched the handcuffed, disgraced veteran out into the expansive, marble-floored expanse of Harbor Trust and Company. The lobby had completely frozen. Word had quickly spread among the staff, and the few customers who had witnessed the initial assault had lingered near the entrance, morbidly fascinated by the arrival of the chief of police. When Crow emerged, stripped of his badge, stripped of his gun, and restrained in steel cuffs, a collective audible gasp rippled through the room. Sophia Lang, the young teller who had been terrified to tears just a short time ago, stood up straight behind the bullet-resistant glass. The sheer vindication on her face mirrored the feelings of everyone present. Crow kept his chin tucked to his chest, unable to make eye contact with a single person. The man who had strutted through the town like an untouchable sheriff was now shuffling across the Italian marble like a broken, pathetic shell. Every heavy footstep echoed through the high, vaulted ceiling, broadcasting his disgrace. Marcus Holloway followed a few paces behind, walking shoulder to shoulder with Chief Langford. Marcus's posture was impeccable. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply walked with the quiet, terrifying aura of a man who had just swiftly and cleanly executed justice. As Davis pushed Crow through the heavy brass doors and out into the crisp air toward the waiting patrol car, Chief Langford stopped at the threshold. "Marcus," Langford said, his gruff voice softening slightly, "I want to personally apologize on behalf of my department and the city. What happened today is a disgrace to the badge. I've been trying to build a case against him for years, but the Union, they always protected him. They aren't protecting him anymore, Victor," Marcus replied, watching the cruiser door slam shut, trapping Crow in the back seat. "But an apology isn't what I'm looking for. A rot like Crow doesn't exist in a vacuum. It festers because the system allows it." "I know," Langford sighed, looking suddenly much older. "The district attorney is going to throw the book at him. I'll make sure of it." "Good," Marcus said, "because my legal team will be watching every single move the DA makes. Have a good day, Chief." Marcus turned on his heel and walked back toward his office. There were compliance documents that still needed his signature. Soon, the legal avalanche Marcus Holloway had promised had already been triggered. Damian Roth, a ruthless civil rights attorney hired by Marcus, didn't just file a lawsuit. He dropped a thermonuclear legal bomb on the city of Westfield and Harlan Crow. The lawsuit bypassed the usual bureaucratic delays, directly targeting Crow's personal assets under federal civil rights statutes that pierced standard qualified immunity, especially since the police union had officially withdrawn their protection. Simultaneously, District Attorney Elias Thornton, terrified of the PR nightmare of having a prominent CEO publicly accuse his office of sheltering a racist cop, moved with unprecedented speed. Crow was officially arraigned promptly. There was no leniency, no professional courtesy. He was charged with felony aggravated assault under color of law, felony false reporting to law enforcement, and official misconduct. The local news media had obtained a strategically leaked, pixelated still frame from the bank's high-resolution security footage. It showed a massive, uniformed officer violently shoving a black man in a hoodie against a desk. The headline across the local paper read, "Rogue Cop Assaults Bank CEO. Chief Fires Veteran on the Spot." Crow's life disintegrated rapidly. In a desperate bid to avoid serving hard time in a state penitentiary, Crow's newly appointed public defender brokered a plea deal. Crow pleaded guilty to the felony assault charge. The judge, Philip Rhodes, a man known for his strict interpretation of the law, didn't hold back during the sentencing. "Mr. Crow," Judge Rhodes's voice boomed through the packed courtroom, "you were entrusted with the safety and dignity of the citizens of this city. Instead, you allowed your own malignant prejudices to dictate your actions. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wore. You are sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 5 years of strict probation." But the prison sentence wasn't the final blow. Because Crow had been convicted of a felony committed while on duty, the State Pension Board convened an emergency administrative hearing. By unanimous vote, the board invoked the forfeiture clause. Crow's lucrative decades-long police pension, the nest egg he and his wife had been counting on for their entire retirement, was legally dissolved, stripped away forever. The civil suit filed by Damian Roth completely wiped out the rest. Facing total bankruptcy, Crow was forced to liquidate his assets, selling his suburban home and depleting his life savings just to settle the lawsuit and pay his mounting legal debts. Marcus Holloway didn't keep a single cent of the settlement money. In the aftermath, Marcus stood at a podium in the grand lobby of Harbor Trust and Company, dressed not in a hoodie, but in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit. The room was packed with local business leaders, city council members, and reporters. Chief Langford stood respectfully near the front row. "Power," Marcus spoke into the microphone, his resonant voice filling the marble room, "is a revealing force. It does not change who you are, it simply magnifies it. Not long ago, a man with a badge stood in this exact room and used his power to humiliate, assault, and discriminate. He believed his power was absolute. He was wrong. Cameras flashed, illuminating the polished mahogany desk where Marcus had been violently pinned. But true justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. Marcus continued, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. It's about dismantling the environment that allowed them to thrive. The civil settlement I received from former Officer Crow will not go into my bank account. Instead, Harbor Trust and Company is establishing a permanent $2 million endowment. The crowd murmured in surprise. This endowment, Marcus announced, will be managed in partnership with Chief Langford and the Westfield Police Department. It will fund mandatory, rigorous, and continuous de-escalation and implicit bias training for every single officer in this county. Furthermore, it will establish a full-ride scholarship program for underprivileged minority students seeking degrees in criminal justice and constitutional law. We are going to flood the system with educated, empathetic, and principled leaders. Applause erupted in the lobby. It was deafening. Lena Prescott stood near the vault doors, beaming with immense pride. Sophia Lang clapped until her hands stung. Marcus Holloway had taken a moment of profound ugliness and weaponized it for the greater good. He had ensured that Harlan Crow's legacy would not be one of fear, but rather the catalyst that ultimately cleansed the department of the exact bigotry Crow represented. Later, on a quiet morning, the Westfield branch was peaceful. The early sunlight streamed through the massive front windows, illuminating the Italian marble. The heavy brass doors swung open. Marcus Holloway walked in. He was wearing a faded, comfortably worn gray athletic hoodie, dark denim jeans, and a pair of scuffed running shoes. He had just finished a 6-mile run and needed to sign some documents for Lena. He bypassed the velvet ropes of the main teller line entirely. Near the front entrance, standing by the high-top mahogany desk, was a young, newly minted police officer working the weekend security detail. The officer saw a tall black man in a hoodie bypass the line and head straight for the restricted back offices. The young officer didn't reach for his belt. He didn't shout. He stood up straight, offering a polite, professional nod. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," the young officer said respectfully. "Ms. Prescott is expecting you in the back." Marcus paused, looking at the young cop. He recognized him as one of the first recipients of the new training protocol funded by the endowment. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of Marcus's mouth. The system wasn't perfect yet. It never would be. But today, in this room, the invisible crown he wore was recognized not by the clothes on his back, but by the undeniable weight of the respect he commanded. "Thank you, officer," Marcus replied smoothly. He pulled open the frosted glass door and walked into his empire, entirely untouched and permanently victorious. What a phenomenal end to an intense, real-life saga. Marcus Holloway didn't just survive a terrifying encounter with a corrupt cop. He used his immense power and intellect to completely dismantle the system protecting him. Officer Crow thought he was untouchable, but he learned the hard way that true authority doesn't come from a badge. It comes from integrity. If you loved watching justice being served cold, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Let us know in the comments. Do you think Crow got what he deserved?